Welcome to the Perfectly Flawed podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. For those that don't know you, would you like to give a little bit of an overview of who you are?
Absolutely. My name's Tara Kinder. I'm a 21-year-old swimmer from Melbourne in Australia. I'm also in the process of studying a Bachelor of Psychology with honours, and I also work at the Victorian Institute of Sport.
It's very exciting. How did you get into swimming? Let's go back to the beginning.
Um, my passion for swimming has certainly had its ups and downs over the years. Just being in competitive sport itself is a pretty difficult run, but the passion itself stems from a few different avenues. I think how I got into it, I just started from a really young age, as most people do, with a regular learn to swim program. Um, and then a coach, for want of a better word, scouted me into some squad training. And I remember absolutely throwing a hissy fit when they told me that I'd had to do 4 sessions a week. And I was like, no, absolutely not. But then, 10 years goes by and I'm doing 10 sessions a week. So it's funny how that unfolds.
Yeah, I think there's not many other sports out there like swimming that requires so much from such a young age. And I think people that are not like in the swimming world don't really understand that kind of commitment. Like it's early hours, long hours. It's a big commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that a lot of people getting into it at like 10 to 12 years old really know what they're signing themselves up for either. So I think it's really important to develop a passion that stems from a different place early on.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, you started at that sort of younger age. When did you sort of see yourself? And I don't know if you do, but I'm sure there was a point where you're like, actually, I'm kind of good at this. Let's see how far I can take it. Was there like a distinct point where you had that realization?
I can't think of a distinct point as such, but I remember when I started to win events at competitions like state champs or just any sort of gold medal at encouragement meets or qualifying meets, um, it became like such a satisfying feeling. And I was like, I really want more of this. What do I have to do to get more of this? And that kind of drove me from the start.
Yeah, absolutely. And how many times do you think you have been asked, did you win your meet?
A million. Especially like going back to high school or even primary school and coming back on a Monday morning from a swim meet on the weekend that you've like posted on your social media and everyone's like, did you win? And I'm like, it's really not that simple, but it's quite funny.
Yeah, I feel like I got asked that so many times, like, "Did you win your meet?" And you just get to the point where you just, like, agree to, like, whatever they ask you. Yeah.
Whatever you say is right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I also know that you're a breaststroker. How did you come to specializing in breaststroke? Because it's a love-hate relationship. People either love it or they hate it.
It really is, but that's how I feel about backstroke. I think a lot of people are like it as well. But it is pretty standard for breaststrokers to hate backstroke. So it just really became something that I was good at because I had like flexible knees and hips, and breaststroke is a stroke where no human body should really bend that way. But um, I started using that flexibility to my strength in training, and then my coach pointed out that if you do more pace sets in this stroke, then you get better at it. And then those swim meets that I was talking about, I would really only enter breaststroke and a bit of IM as well because IM tends to be really reliant on that breaststroke leg. So it just became something that came naturally to me. And I've really never considered another stroke.
No, I think once you become a breaststroker, like, that's it. And then, as you
That
say,
is it.
everyone hates backstroke. Like, it's just
Yeah, there's one avenue and that's it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So you recently competed at trials as well.
Mhm.
What's your thoughts, feelings about the meet?
Trials went a little bit south for me than what I was hoping for it to be. But I landed in Brisbane, got a bit sick, had some like, personal things, mental things coming around, and it all just like kind of crumbled on me behind the blocks for my races. But I think the sickness was definitely one of the bigger factors. Um, I pulled out of a couple of my races to give me 3 days in the middle of the meet to just like rest up and try get better for 400 IM. I remember was on the last day, and I managed to pull out like zero point 0.2 of a PB, which is nothing in a 400-meter race. But after the shocker I had in the last first few days, I was happy to come away with a little PB. But yeah, it wasn't what I trained for, but I still think I have to remind myself that since I quit and then came back, I have only been in the sport for it was 12 months at that point. So keeping things in perspective was very important as well.
Yeah, and I want to come back to taking some time out, but how do you manage knowing that you're unwell and like that mental headspace going into a race? Do you think it adds more pressure or takes pressure off? It's like, oh, I'm sick, like it's not going to be the best anyway.
Going into it before I got sick, I kind of felt, I don't want to use the word pressure because everyone that spoke to me about it was very particular in making sure I knew that there wasn't any pressure, but all of the support staff and my coaches and even my friends and family was like, you have nothing to lose. You've spent 12 months training for this since the comeback. Like you've already come so far. This is, such a great achievement as in itself. Making the team would be great or coming top three would be great, but there's no pressure. And I think when I got sick, it was a little bit like, will the sniffles kind of let these people down who have believed in me? Or is it going to be like an excuse I can use to say, I didn't do what you were hoping I was going to do because of this? But in the end, it was like, I'm more disappointed myself, I think. I got really hung up in that mindset of I'm sick and that means I can't train well. And that's like swimming's done. You can't swim when you're sick. Even though I've had all that training under my belt, I didn't really think about that. And yeah, it's just something to fix for the next time around.
Yeah. Have you always sort of been that way inclined where you do put, and lack of a better word, pressure on yourself and you have high expectations and wanting to achieve those goals and not letting people down?
Um, I have a pretty strict rule with myself that not everyone's a fan of, but I say that I don't set goals because I don't want to reach for the stars and then not make it because I feel like I would crumble more with that disappointment than I would if I just like swam bad but didn't have any sort of bar to meet. So going into trials was definitely a new thing with listening to my coach and actually trying to get him to, he was trying to get in my head and tell me to, not put a limit on things and just see what I can do. And that in turn did kind of mentally set a little goal for myself. And I'm not sure how that would have gone if I didn't get sick. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, I actually don't mind the fact that you say you don't set goals. I mean the way my brain works, I feel like that could be quite beneficial and not getting disappointed. But
Yeah, for
how do
sure.
you then work towards something in training? How does that then work on the flip side?
I think um, I definitely set goal times, but they're more so for the long run. So leading into trials, I had the Olympic qualifying times as what my goal PB was and what I wanted to hit. And we have a little spreadsheet that we have on a little laminated piece of paper every training session. And it's got like the splits, the turn times, the stroke counts, the rates, and everything broken down into this whole race analysis. Um, and I look at that and use it when we're pacing sets and things. And I think that that's a really good motivator because I have something in the short term to hit. So doing 50s and like you want to be hitting 34s, like I'm happy with that sort of goal. But putting that into a kind of package deal as one race and then the pressure of everything coming down to like 2.5 minutes really gets to me. Whereas in a training session, it's laps on laps on laps. So you can kind of reset after each one or like forget about one that didn't, you might not have hit that time. But yeah, the race itself just being one and done is where the pressure comes from, I think.
Yeah, I think as you say, like in training, you've got room to sort of manipulate and adjust. Whereas in a race, if you don't have time for that, it's there or it's not.
Mm, absolutely.
So it can be a little bit overwhelming. How did you make the decision to leave the sport? And then we'll go into the coming back. But what was the initial reason for leaving?
Um, so 2021, where Olympic trials were, and they were supposed to be in 2020 for Tokyo, we as Melburnians were put into a lockdown that forced us to, me and my squad had to fly out of Melbourne with about, I think it was a 5 hours notice, 2 weeks earlier than we were supposed to leave for Adelaide. Um, so we got on a plane as quickly as possible before it became a red zone. flew to Adelaide for trials. But before that, we spent 2 weeks in the Gold Coast and like the training camp, and everything was just not an ideal prep that you would want going into what was at the time the biggest comp of my life as a freshly 18-year-old, which was really scary. I through all that thing, all of the things that went wrong, I ended up getting glandular fever. So we go back to getting sick before an Olympic trials seems to be my specialty. But I ended up having glandular fever that I didn't know I had. So it was kind of the opposite of what happened this year. I was telling myself that I've done all the prep and all this stuff doesn't really matter. But I think ignorance was bliss for me in that scenario, because if I had known that I had glandular fever, I probably wouldn't have been able to perform the way I did. And although that still wasn't what I wanted, it was a PB. It's like in the 200 IM, which was the race that I was focusing on that year. It's still my PB to date. I haven't matched it yet. So I think it's really interesting, just in terms of like your mental and mindset things, with how I was really ill, but still managed to pull that out. And that was just a big disappointment race from that. And then coming home and realizing that I had glandular fever and then having to deal with that, I spent some time out of the pool, which also happened to be my year 12 year in school. So while I was recovering from glandular fever, we had our year 12 exams, which was a lot for me. And then I took some more time out of the pool after starting to get back in for a little schoolies trip, which was fun. But I think graduating high school, it gave me like a taste of the outside world, outside of being an athlete that just swims and goes to school and then back to the pool. And I was like, I think I really want to do something with that. I picked up surfing. I ended up meeting a boy, like all of those nasty things that just like draw you away from the sport. And I graduated in November, December, and ended up telling my coach that I wanted to take some time away. He wanted me to go to a Com Games trials in 2022, and that was initially the plan until I said, I don't think I can do that. I don't have the passion for it anymore. So I did step away from the sport thinking that I was never going to come back to it. I started full-time uni, working like 2 or 3 jobs at a time, just being more of a normal person outside of being an athlete. And I think that break was really, really good for me. I might not have needed the whole, I think it was a year and a half that I took off, but I definitely did need to step away from the sport for a bit. But coming back to it also wasn't a plan. So everything kind of just happens one point at a time, and I just went along with the flow.
Yeah, I think that's sort of a good way to live. And I know there's so many people that sort of get to year 12 and become, like, in the eyes of the law, an adult. And you get a taste of, as you say, like normalcy. And it's like, oh, this is what everyone else does. Okay, this is kind of cool. I can go out and not have to think about being up at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning, or,
Yeah,
planning around, oh shit, I've got training, I've got to meet on. Can I do this? Can I do that? And trying to like mentally work out your schedule in your head. You can just go out and just live and enjoy life without having to think about those things.
yeah.
How did you come to the decision then to go back?
Um, During my time off, I spent a bit of time living out of home. And once I decided that that wasn't for me, and I did miss my family a bit and having dinners cooked for me every night and all that lovely stuff, I moved back home. So when I was living out of home, it was about 2 hours from where my family lives. So I moved back home, realized how much I missed it, and it just felt almost right to kind of do a full circle and come back to swimming as well. So I remember the day after I'd unpacked all my things back into my childhood bedroom, I called my coach and I was like, hey, do you want to, catch up for a coffee? I'll come in for a swim with the squad and we'll see what we can do. And he was also very skeptical at the time because I hadn't touched a pool in the year and a half. I wasn't one of those people that stays doing laps just for fitness. I just completely abandoned it. Um, but he was very, very good in the sense that he knew the reasons that I quit and he knew the reasons that I wanted to come back. So he did gracefully accept me back into the squad, and we just slowly built up the training. And I think what drove me then was I was swimming for myself. It was not to reach a certain time or make a team or any sort of goal like that. It was I loved it and realized how much I missed it. So I just used that every single day, getting in the pool and those first 4 months were the hardest in building back up fitness and getting back into routine and all that. And I think that's really special to me because I did miss it. I missed it a lot.
Yeah, I think it's such a unique environment because it takes so much commitment. The relationships you build within the sport are like nothing else. It's like a family unit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is it now that you want to get out of swimming now that you're back?
I really just want to go as far as I can, whether that's where I am now, which I don't think it is, but even if it is, or making a senior team, which I hope to do, or making a final from a senior team or getting in the podium or any of those crazy things like breaking world records and things. I really just want to see how far I can push myself mentally and physically every day and just be better than what I was the day before.
Yeah, absolutely. Putting the comeback and leaving the sport aside, what do you think has been one of or some of your biggest challenges that you've faced?
Um, I've had a few setbacks in my swimming. You know, there's performance letdowns, there's illnesses that I mentioned, and injuries, of course. And then the quitting swimming is definitely a big part. Like I said, I didn't make a good performance in Olympic trials in for Tokyo. I think that was probably one of the biggest things I dealt with, which, as I said, ultimately led me to quit the sport. But it's really just coming back from little things. So illness and injury would probably be my biggest things. Like I've dislocated my shoulder a few times. Thankfully, nothing crazy that needs surgery of any sort, but it's just that getting to a really good point and then having something that pulls you back and having to just creep up that little bit more and being a few paces behind where you really wanted. I think that's something that I struggle with a lot. But of course, as all athletes do, you do everything to try and avoid those things, but sometimes they just inevitably happen.
Yeah. How do you go with the mental side of injury? Because I feel like that's not sort of spoken about as much. It's always, oh, you're physically injured. So it sort of just gets spoken about the physical side of it. How did you battle it mentally?
Um, it's more so I believe in like my physios, the medical team, and everyone who actually physically helps me rehabilitate from something like a shoulder injury. But as I said, it's like you've been put back a few steps from the plan that you had and what you where you wanted to be. And I think dealing with that for me is just about realizing that you can't push yourself in that scenario. So no matter how hard you want to be back to where you were before the injury, it's not a possible option because doing that can injure you even more. And it's really just about like being patient, which I did struggle with a lot. I think I'd like to think I'm getting on top of that now.
Yeah, I think I've experienced injuries of my own, and sometimes you just want to like punch something or scream into a pillow because it's just like,
Yeah.
why?
It's like, well, what did I do to deserve this?
Yeah, and it's always at the worst time. Like it's never a good time. I mean, there's never a good time to get injured. Swimming's all year round.
Yeah,
But it always just seems to be like when things are going really well, it's like, nope, no, no, things are going too well. Here's something that you need to overcome first.
absolutely. Yeah.
On the flip side of that, what do you think is something that you're super proud of in your career so far?
Um, I really think coming back to the sport has been, I know we're focusing a lot on that, but I think that was a big challenge for me, as much as it was like, without a question, what I was going to do in that scenario. It was a really difficult time. As I said, I hadn't touched a pool in a year and a half, and I dove in just thinking that it would all come back, but it really didn't. So just really that like 4 month grind that I went through and getting back into full-time training, I think I'm really proud of myself with how I handled that mentally, physically, and just doing every single little thing that I could have done to aid that recovery back into the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. What sort of things go through your head mentally leading into a big meet like trials? Putting the sickness aside, how do you mentally go into that, and what's sort of your inner monologue like?
I feel like I really need to remind myself that I love to race. I know some people love training and pushing themselves, but I swim to race. If there was an option where I didn't have to train as much or do as many sessions and still race at a high performance level, I would probably take that option. But unfortunately, that's not the case. I think racing is just like one of my favorite things to do. The high you get when you're behind the blocks and the rush of adrenaline is not something that you have in everyday life. So I really just remind myself not to take that for granted and enjoy it because I know I do. And at the end of the day, no no race is going to hurt as much as the training sessions that you've pushed yourself through in week to week schedule. So it's just always going to be a bit of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And since coming back to the sport, how important is it for you to still maintain normalcy outside of swimming?
Um, I think it's very important, but I have also come to terms with the fact that it is a very time consuming activity and a life schedule. So as much as I do love working and earning money and having money to spend and all these things, it's like swimming's my number one priority. I'd never miss a session or get out early or anything just to go to work. I think it's really been a challenge to find somewhere that works that way and links in quite nicely to my life. But there are sacrifices with a sport like this, and that's just inevitable. So I think that where I am now, I'm quite happy with. It's very nice. I've got time for myself, my work, my hobbies, my friends, my family. So I think I'm handling that quite well at the moment, but I know that it is a juggle.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. What kind of things are in your hobbies? What things do you like to do outside of swimming?
As I said, when I wasn't swimming, I did get into surfing, but that's become a very occasional activity now because it's like a 2 hour drive away to where I want to surf. My surfboard stays at my friend's house down in Port Arlington. There's so many things that stop me from doing that as much as I want to. Plus, also recovering from training is not going to happen when you're in the ocean. Um, I do get into sort of arts and crafts things sometimes just to take my mind off things and still do something that isn't sitting around and doom scrolling, which I think we can all be a bit guilty of. Um, I do quite like socializing. I've got my swim squad, which are all boys. I am the only girl in a group of about 10 boys, and my coach is a boy, and everyone else is a boy. So I do love hanging out with my girlfriends as well. It's a very big factor for me that I do want to fit into my schedule all the time. Um, but yeah, it changes week to week.
How do you go with that dynamic being the only girl? Is it good, bad? I'm sure there's pros and cons, but how do you go with that?
There's definitely pros and cons. I think there's so many things that I could mention, but like there's the positives of being able to push yourself, um, swimming next to boys who are faster, older, stronger, and just fitter than you. But then there's the downside of sometimes that being too much and me being at the back of the set and just giving up because they're so far ahead. But I think it is really important that I have those guys to train with me and push me, as much as I would love a couple other females to join me. It's really good. And they're all like older brothers. It's really nice. We've got like Olympians in that squad and then people who are aspiring to be that. So we're all there for the same reason. Um, we have such good like banter and it is just a really healthy environment at the moment. So I'm very grateful for them.
Yeah, that's really good because it's so easy for that to get toxic, I think. I think sometimes it can be a bit of a boys' club. So it's so good
Yeah.
to know that it's more family and it's a bit of banter and probably like poke fun of you like a little sister. But also, if someone tries to mess with you, they'll be the first ones to sort of stand up and be like, absolutely not.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. They are like a big family of brothers, as I said. And I think it's cool that a lot of them weren't in the squad when I quit. And then when I came back a year and a half ago, they're new people that I'd either never trained with before or never met at all. So there's a couple guys who I've known from state teams back in like 2018, 19, that there was Noah who I've been on junior worlds with, Calvin who I was on state teams with. There's people who I've been in like the Victorian swimming pathways with and just never really had that deeper connection or trained with them. And it was really nice like getting to know everyone and building those connections and seeing them every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to ask because you sort of mentioned that it seems to be a theme that you get sick before a big comp. How do you deal with sort of not performing? I don't want to say failure, I use that very lightly, probably just not getting the results that you wanted versus achieving above and beyond. Do you view them in the same way? Like, how do you go about that?
I'm not sure. I think failures, for want of a better word, are just as important as success. It's there's always a lesson to learn. And I know it sounds so cliche that if it's never a loss, it's always a lesson and all that stuff. And I hear it from my coach enough as well. But it is really true. I think that there's something to learn from everything that you do in a sport like this. So with trials that just happened, I know that the taper I did wasn't obviously good for my immune system. There was some external things that I could have done to better myself. There's probably going to keep more volume going through taper, and then dealing with travel, even though it was like a 2 hour flight, there's dealing with travel as well interstate for comps like that. And it's just, there's so many dot points that like me and my coach and everyone else are going to be working on for the next time round. And we also have to remind myself that I've missed like 2 or 3 important taper blocks from major comps in that gap where I didn't swim. So it is still about experimenting now. As much as I'd like to have it down pat, I don't, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to know what like younger Tara would think of what you've done in your career so far, from, going to Tokyo trials to then taking time off to now coming back and doing trials again this year for Paris. What do you think she would feel about that?
I think she would be happy. I want to say that. I may not be an Olympian, which is every kid's little dream. But that's what she would have hoped I would be. But I know that I'm happy, I'm healthy, I'm heading in the right direction that I want to be to keep improving and follow those big goals. So I'd hope that that's what she would be happy for me about.
I'm sure she would. I'd love to do 3 questions with you. And the first one is, what is something that you're most proud of about yourself?
Um, there's a really loud motorbike going past. Proudest of myself. I think it's really important to acknowledge who I am outside of being an athlete as well. So my continual growth as a person is really important to me. I just think there's constantly new things happening around every day, and I'm very willing to learn. I'm very open to learning. I'm a curious person, mostly for the better. I'd say I'm quite good at putting myself in other people's shoes as well. And that's helped me develop different sorts of empathy, particularly for those who I care about. And I think I'm just really proud about how I've grown to interact with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are really great things and definitely something that you should be proud of. Do you have a favorite quote or both, even best piece of advice that you've been given?
Quote. I think, gosh, I've got to get it right now, but there's one that says, anyone can want it, but not everyone can embody the actions that lead to it. And I think that really resonates with me because I I want to be someone who stands out, whether it's as a swimmer or just an everyday person. I want to do something that, sets me aside from everybody else. And I think that quote can be attributed just to general life or in the high performance sport. With swimming, for instance, there's a very select few people who ever get to make it to an international stage, let alone the Olympics. Or obtaining a gold medal on a stage like that. And then there's breaking world records and all that stuff, which is insane. But not everyone takes it that step further and pushes themselves to their absolute limits. I certainly haven't, um, which is why I'm not at that level yet. But the point is that it's almost everyone's goal, but it's not going to be everyone's reality.
Yeah, absolutely. don't think I've heard that quote before, but it's good. I do like that.
I don't know who it's by or if it's by anyone.
That's okay. The last question I have for you is, do you have any tips or advice for those that are listening?
Again, with the cliches, I think people are going to roll their eyes, but really just have fun, be kind. It sounds simple, but it's really not all that common nowadays. I think just to be the light in any situation is what I tell myself, because when I'm in darkness myself, you'd love to have someone that just pops in to be that little light bulb. But yeah, I think that would be all I ask of anyone that's listening.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people listening that have really loved listening to your story, so thank you for sharing.
Thank you.